class. How many of you would take a job in a town of 2,000 in South Dakota that paid you $100,000, or would you take the same job that paid you half, $50,000 in New York, Chicago, and LA? And what do you think they say? Okay, 90% every year, every class say Chicago, New York, and LA. They will take half of the salary and go to the bigger city. What does that say? Those amenities are worth $50,000 for each of those students. This is big money. Mayor Daley understands this. He has been building amenities with a vengeance since about 1995. He didn't get elected on this program. He came up through his traditions of his father and the like. But in 1995, okay, I'm doing an oral history of Chicago. I won't go into that. I can if you want, but the city, and the other reason this is important is that there's a book by Rich Longworth called Caught in the Middle. It's the first book on cities and towns and villages in the Midwest and how they're different from the rest of the country. And basically the main story he tells is that people in small town Midwestern areas or as well as Milwaukee, Detroit, St. Louis will say the Chinese and the Mexicans and the people in Dubai are stealing our jobs, and we are left with empty cornfields and factories that are defunct. We are victims. And then he says in a new chapter, except in Chicago. Okay, and what's different about Chicago? Amenities. And that's the answer that my students give. I want to be here because we got all these amenities. I don't want to go to, declining St. Louis or Detroit or even Minneapolis. Okay. So in that sense, what I'm briefly mentioning is changes in models, such as the students don't take the money. Sally takes starts a veggie burger stand in San Diego. And I'm illustrating some of I'm making the quick point that economists had a sense of this 25 years ago. And they started to try to measure amenities. That is, you can't measure them with what people pay, so they began to develop ways of trying to do this by measuring such things as cities that were higher in land value or home value if they had cleaner air, things of that sort. Rich Florida's two pieces stress, first, I got confused. The argument of Glaser, the main argument of Glaser is that that talent drives the economy, and talent is critical to be attracted. And Rich Florida agrees with it. So Florida, Glaser, and I have been sort of making the general argument that one ought to pay attention to these amenities and consumption. And they're critical in transforming the world. And we've been getting lots of flack. We get criticized for all kinds of stuff. Florida, in the piece I suggest you take a look at, stresses now there are two. One is the flight of the creative class. The other is the spiky paper. All right, the spiky paper basically is a critique of the world is flat argument, that now we have computers, we have the internet, anybody can live anywhere, it doesn't make any difference. And he shows with three little graphics that if you look at the economy, if you look at patents, and if you look at citations to scientific papers, they're increasingly very spiky and very concentrated. That is, there's a small number of elite places like this campus right here, where there are lots of people who are writing papers that are people citing, people see, and if you map this for the entire world, there are a small number of spiky places. So even though you could do Nobel Prize work in chemistry in the middle of the desert, it helps if you got a whole lot of smart postdocs who are working with you 24 hours a day, and you're all sort of helping each other with experiments, talking about stuff, and so that tends that there's a local dynamism which can transform these patterns. That's point one. Point two, there's a lot. The talent, the way it works now, or it has worked in the last few decades, involves a whole lot of migration by some very talented people. And these people, in turn, can transform the whole economy of China or India or Japan and the U.S. People talk about the brain drain. People talk about talented students from lesser developed countries who come to the West, and some go back, some don't, or they go back in various ways. For instance, one major example is poor young engineers in India get educated. They may get some degrees in India, or they may get a final degree or not in the U.S. Then they go to Silicon Valley. They make a couple of $1 billion over 10 or 15 years, and then they may open some factory. They may open, they may have a few more patents. They may be part of something going on in Silicon Valley, and then they say, either because for whatever reason they can do it cheaper, or they have friends, or they have Indian patriotism, they then transform a lot of this activity to India. And so their locations, Bangalore in India, are booming with computer programming in ways that are linked with these global patterns. The point I'm making is the interpenetration. Okay, so in Florida's point in the Rise to Creative Class book basically is, with the Bush administration's clampdown after 9/11 on international migration, this is a major problem for the talented migration, for high-level conferences, for grad students, and for others, in ways that can potentially severely dampen the most creative parts of research, design, and the economy. Okay. Okay, let me shift to some of what we have here. The other reading was on scenes, but that's what I mainly want to try to develop for you here. This is just, we'll start briefly with an example of testing the creative class idea of Florida to link with some of that discussion. This now, so I mentioned very briefly, and I'll illustrate it more here. To model these new patterns, ideally, we want to go drill down to as low a level as we can. Not just the whole US, not just states, not just cities, zip codes. So we've now got zip codes and street addresses for millions of data points. This permits us to find more fine-grained dynamics going on and to separate them instead of having them sort of mushed all together. Okay, so what attracts a creative class? Here we have data for every U.S. zip code, about 42,000, and we've got a bunch of indicators. And this is not all of this will be crystal clear, but it should be in about 20 minutes. Okay, so what this basically says is, what are the factors that attract or drive away or discourage the creative class? Creative class defined as more or less, I think in this case it's college graduates. Okay, so where do college graduates move, and what are the positive and negative factors? Got to get here myself. We've got the standard variables: per capita income, proportion to non-white, Christian churches, population size, and this has a positive impact or a negative impact, net of everything else in the regression model. This is renting, rent. So places with people move especially to low rent zip codes. You may have a low rent zip code in Brooklyn outside Manhattan, or a low rent zip code in Chicago, even though you're within shooting distance on Saturday night or Tuesday night of other places. Yes? Okay, so yeah, sorry, I gotta stay near here. That's fine. Yeah, okay, very good. It's just that sometimes I can't read it myself. So the two variables that are most important here are low rent and voting Democratic. We also have over on the left I'll just mention briefly, and this is what I want to introduce, some things that you don't see in the normal past literature. Traditional scenes. Okay, utilitarian, egalitarian, and neighborly scenes. These are what I want to introduce and talk about. These are neighborhood characteristics that we'll look at in a new way. Here's another quick example, just to link the whole scenes idea with migration more directly. One point we make is we also want not just to talk about total migration, we want to break up types of migration by geographic area and by type of person. So not total, but also by age cohort, by young people, that is, with as much detail as we can get from the available sources. The main source is the U.S. or the national census in each country. And they have data by age cohort. They have college graduates, percent non-white. And the main point of this is to show that if we have a regression where we control a bunch of all those things over on the left, the results differ for different age cohorts. So for instance, Rich Florida was here a few years ago, and he gave a talk for an hour, and he talked about what you need to really be a dynamic, creative city and have things really go well. The first question was, how can Chicago do this with the weather we have? How can we ever keep up with Silicon Valley and San Diego? Okay, and his answer was, you know, Terry Clark and I have a book, and in the chapter by I've analyzed basically the elderly move to warm spots, mountains, streams, and natural amenities. For people 25 to 34, those have almost no impact. And in terms of the creative economy, at least I would say there's too much focus on the young, but at least there's a lot of focus on 25 to 34-year-old recent college graduates. And the short point is they're coming to Chicago, even though it's cold. So the point of this is different classes of people, different sectors of society move for different reasons, with just that one quick example as an illustration. Okay, I'll briefly just show this. This summarizes 8 books in one picture. And it basically is that the old model, I'll try this pointer here. The old models of class politics and clientelism, which are sort of politics is rich versus poor, or patronage is clientelism, nepotism, as they have in Naples and elsewhere in Chicago and so forth. These are changing dramatically. They're changing in good part because of a lesser national government emphasis, and globalization. Globalization is changing a whole lot of things, and which you've heard more commonly discussed. Migration, the end of the Cold War. I mean, economic factors. What we add here is there's a whole lot of politics that's also changing. That the traditional clientelism, class politics, and the like, such as the potential socialist future president of France, had trouble in a New York hotel, and France may have a different president as a consequence. That's a social issue. He was not saying your price is too high. It was not a fiscal. The point is, moral, ethical, lifestyle, consumption issues are a major part of politics and lifestyle today. Why? And how does that relate to this? Because we have more egalitarianism, because citizens are more important, more legitimate as a source of legitimacy, and average folks can understand basic personal values and morality, and those become more important, whereas I'm not saying that traditional jobs and economic incentives are no longer, they're still there, but they've got these new things to compete with. Issue politics, the environment, lifestyle, citizen participation, market individualism, roles of women, questioning the welfare state and trying to find more efficient ways of delivering those same great services, etc. We've got a lot of shakeups in the political systems around the world, and even if a country like Argentina or Iraq try not to be part of the rest of the world, there's enough pressure to make it much harder. I mean, the world has drastically changed in this respect in the last 15 years. This in turn tends to lead to consumption, public goods, and amenities.